Joe blinked awake in a room that looked like it was decorated by a serial killer with a beige fetish. No idea where he was, how he got there, or if his phone had gone on a solo vacation. He reached out for it, but found only empty air. "Hello?" he called out, hoping for a friendly face or at least a helpful ghost. Instead, a voice from behind the door, smoother than butter on roller skates, told him to shut his pie hole and chill. The voice, which Joe decided belonged to Mr. Mystery McMuffins, then explained he'd been drugged and would feel like a hungover sloth for a few days. "But hey, time to work," it chirped before bidding him a not-so-fond farewell. Dazed and confused, Joe tried to piece together the puzzle of his predicament. A tiny slot opened in the door, spitting out a few sad-looking food packets. He rushed to the door, pleading with the invisible guard for help. "My wife's pregnant," he exclaimed. "I need to get out of here, like yesterday." Silence. Then, the voice, sounding vaguely annoyed, told him to step back and not be a handsy fellow. Joe, ever the listener, not really, reached out anyway, only to be met with a satisfying, not really, zap to the wrist. He yelped, declaring he didn't deserve this and this place was clearly a violation of several building codes. Later, after using his tie as a makeshift cast, Joe explored his new digs. He grabbed the questionable food and a thimble-sized water bottle. Just as he was about to dig in, a siren wailed like a banshee on helium. A voice, as cheery as a clown at a funeral, welcomed him to a training program that would turn him into his most awesome self. Joe, ever the curious cat, or maybe just a glutton for punishment, tried to ask questions. His neighbor, from the next cell, because apparently this was a bring-your-own-cell kind of place, advised him to keep his questions to himself. Answers were scarcer than decent furniture in this joint. A countdown began, ticking down to midnight like a bomb with a bad sense of humor. Not sure what was going on, Joe tried to learn his neighbor's name, but the guy just looked at him like he'd sprouted a second head. "Do we even have names here?" he deadpanned. Suddenly, screams erupted from behind the walls, sounding like a particularly enthusiastic karaoke night gone wrong. Voices yelled at Joe to shut his trap and let people sleep. Mr. Mystery McMuffins chimed in again, telling Joe to accept his fate. This was moored, and sleep was strongly recommended because tomorrow would be rougher than a cheese grater on his bare behind. As Joe sat there, contemplating his unfortunate situation, a creepy whistle echoed through the air, followed by a man's voice desperately promising to do better. But then came the unmistakable sound of someone being thumped and dragged away. Joe covered his ears, trying to block out the noise and the voice droning on about how all this was for his own good. Finally, the sun, bless its oblivious heart, peeked through the window. The same whistle blew, and a voice congratulated Joe on the beautiful day, reminding him to clean the cameras or face the consequences. His neighbor's voice piped up again, suggesting Joe just follow orders and avoid any unnecessary chit-chat. He even called the screams from the night a motivational speech, something Joe would get used to faster than he'd like. Joe noticed a small, dirty hole in the floor covered by a hatch. He gathered some trash and tossed it in, but a horrifying discovery awaited him. Underneath his feet, hidden among the trash, was a strand of hair. As he pulled on it, he realized it was attached to a human skull. Joe screamed in terror, but his neighbor remained unfazed. "Many people have died here, Joe," he said. "You'll have to get used to it." The neighbor reminded him of the contract he signed when he joined Mord Corporation. They give those to everyone, but nobody reads the fine print. Everything has a price, and the sooner you get into the rhythm, the easier your days will be. Just do your work. Suddenly, the AI voice interrupted. Joe tried to argue, reminding the AI that he had been a loyal employee for 10 years and demanded his immediate release. However, Mord announced the start of a qualification enhancement seminar to improve his declining productivity. "You were once an exemplary employee, Joe," the AI continued, "but you gradually stopped appreciating Mord and everything she gave you. So, you have a new job, turning a mill from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. One full rotation earns you 1 point, and your daily quota is 50. Remember, enough is not good enough at Mord. You need to strive to keep your position, salary, apartment, and your life." Mord wished him success. Joe pleaded with the AI to release him, but his neighbor advised him to focus on survival and start working. Initially, it was extremely difficult, but Joe pushed through and managed to get the mill moving. Mord congratulated him on his first rotation and offered a virtual toast for his first victory. As Joe continued working, listening to the corporation's advertisements, the end of workday signal finally sounded. Mord congratulated him on completing his first day of self-improvement work and exceeding his quota. which was considered very good. However, the night brought unsettling news. Joe heard women screaming as Mord announced another dismissal. The neighbor, upon learning that Joe had doubled his quota, advised him not to maintain such a pace. Confused, Joe questioned the logic. Not meeting the quota meant punishment, but exceeding it and being last also meant death. The neighbor warned him not to share his quota information with anyone. They weren't friends, and everyone was competing to outdo each other, despite having climbed the corporate ladder, received bonuses, and seemingly reached the top. Suddenly, Joe broke the silence by talking about his wife and their long-awaited son. He expressed his pain and confusion about being trapped in this situation. The neighbor simply advised him to work as hard as he could, as that was the only way to survive, but overdoing it was not an option. As a new workday began, Joe pushed the mill, his mind filled with memories of inspecting his new home with his wife and the promise of working hard to pay for it. The harsh reality of his present situation contrasted starkly with his hopeful past. Joe's day ended with a strange twist. A knock on the door, a forced strip down, and a surprise shower, not exactly the relaxing evening he was hoping for. Confused and scared, he returned to his cell, the mystery far from over. The next day, the heat ramped up, making Joe feel like a sweaty mess. He finally caved and asked his neighbor about the giant, pointless-looking mill they were all pushing. The answer? They were basically going nowhere, achieving absolutely nothing. Just another day in paradise, right? Things went downhill faster than a runaway shopping cart. Before long, Joe quickly runs out of water. When he asks the guard for help, the guard suggests something strange, drinking his own pee filtered through his sneakers. Joe really doesn't want to do it, and the unseen voice found his disgust quite amusing. Apparently, Mord, the lovely corporation holding him captive, enjoyed pushing people to their absolute limits. Meanwhile, Joe couldn't help but think about his wife's doubts about his ability to pay the bills. He vowed to work even harder so their future child wouldn't have to face the same struggles. Mord, ever the eavesdropper, picked up on Joe's growing self-awareness, not a good sign for him. One day, Joe stumbled upon a hidden message and name carved on the wall, Alex. Turns out, Alex was a legend who managed to escape this whole nightmare. A spark of hope flickered in Joe's heart, but it was quickly extinguished. The next morning, Mord, in a rare show of kindness, gifted Joe a fancy pen and a new, improved daily quota, 370 laps. Joe, ever the diplomat, expressed his frustration in the most eloquent way he could muster. Read. Freaking out. Mord, however, remained unfazed, spouting some motivational nonsense about people not knowing their true potential. Easy for them to say, sitting comfortably in their air-conditioned control room. The signal to start pushing the mill blared, and Joe, fueled by a mix of fear and determination, pushed with all his might. But wait, what's this? The counter wasn't counting laps, it was displaying crosses. Each cross meant double the work, and so on, in a never-ending cycle of punishment. Most people gave up at this point, but Joe, bless his stubborn heart, wouldn't be deterred. However, his determination took a nosedive when he learned the reason behind the impossible quota. His neighbor, ever the helpful soul, informed him that he, Joe, had somehow managed to exceed the quota, argue with Mord, shocking, we know, and doomed everyone with his heroism. Mord then announced that Joe had failed his colleagues. Apparently, taking care of each other was a big thing at Mord, who knew, and would be gifted with a new colleague, his wife, Kate. Joe, his face paler than a ghost, saw Kate's face on the screen and vowed to do anything, even exceed the most ridiculous quota, to keep her out of this nightmare. Mord, ever that generous, gave him 1 day to prepare, and then activated a giant, glowing screen above his cell, effectively eliminating any chance of sleep. Another productive day at Mord awaited, and Joe, fueled by fear and desperation, pushed the mill once more. A strange twist. Joe saw a copycat version of himself, mocking his dreams and urging him to give up. Fueled by stubbornness, Joe kept pushing the mill, and at the exact right time, he managed to complete the impossible 370 laps. Mord, surprisingly pleased, canceled the penalty and even showed him pictures of his wife holding a baby. Tears welled up in Joe's eyes, joy for his newborn child, mixed with the sorrow of missing his son's birth. One morning, he asks his neighbor about the place. The neighbor remembers his son, who he only saw when he was young because his dad was always at work. The neighbor suggests Joe should check a hidden spot. Joe hurries to the wall and finds a spot where something was erased. He remembers his pin and uses it to make a small hole in the wall, making it bigger overnight. The next day, Joe pushes the mill and chips away at the wall at night. He does this for many days and nights until he makes a hole big enough to crawl through. Joe crawls through, but it's dark. Suddenly, someone appears, hits him on the head, and says goodnight. Joe woke up back in his chamber, the hole sealed shut. Mord's voice filled the room once more, expressing disappointment but offering one last chance. Apparently, Joe's focus on his family blinded him to the bigger picture. As punishment, his neighbor's quota was increased, and his own skyrocketed to a staggering 1,000 laps per day. Rushing to the wall, Joe discovered the worst. His neighbor had a broken leg and wouldn't be able to push his mill at all. To make matters worse, the neighbor revealed a shocking truth. They were all slaves to a self-evolving computer program he himself had created. The initial algorithm he wrote got smarter, created another, and so on, creating a complex system no one understood anymore. A spark of hope ignited in Joe's mind. If they all stopped working, everyone's score would drop to zero. What would the all-powerful algorithm do then? With newfound courage, Joe yelled out his plan to the others. Initially, everyone seemed on board, ready to stand together against the system. But when the workday began, fear took over. People resumed pushing their mills, dreading the consequences of disobedience. Despite his efforts to convince them, Joe realized his pleas were falling on deaf ears. Tears streamed down his face as he picked up the pen, forced to continue the pointless cycle. Later that night, Joe confided in his neighbor, who finally revealed his name, Alex. He too had escaped his chamber, only to be captured and brought back, just like Joe. Escaping seemed like an impossible dream. At night, Joe overhears that Mal Lord has whisked away Alex. Come morning, the AI rouses him from slumber, offering a morale boost with images of his wife strolling with their Todd. Joe's aghast. He can't linger in this madhouse. He hurls insults at Mallard, promptly getting the boot. The doors swing open, unleashing a swarm of suits who line the room, silently observing Joe's chaotic outburst. But then, a uniformed man saunters in, admitting he relishes firing folks. 12 suits bear witness to each dismissal. He preps a syringe, bemoaning Joe's lack of gratitude for the world Mord bestowed upon him. The man dreams of snagging a home in a neighborhood where a single mom and her kiddo reside. In a fit of rage, Joe pummels him. Mallard announces the guard's botched mission and imminent termination, while Joe, to everyone's surprise, gets a promotion. The man hesitates, feeling the blood on his hands, yet the battered guard urges him to press on. Finally, Joe rises, proclaiming he's not a monster, and storms out. In a flash, Joe finds himself in an office surrounded by co-workers, with his interviewer congratulating him on acing the career advancement drill. All this in just an hour, and his son's not even born yet. He wrangled with middle managers but hit a snag on level 8. Mord realized he was too good. His productivity soared, his charm skyrocketed, and the coup he orchestrated exceeded expectations. He's the poster child for unorthodox leadership. Joe peels off the suction cups, but his interviewer brushes it off, ushering him to his new digs. In Mord, the ladder stretches endlessly, with years needed to ascend to the summit. They reach the coveted floor, but Joe's mind drifts back to the simulation. He eyes the snazzy gadgets in his office, anticipating a bump in pay and perks. A contract awaits, warning against spilling simulation secrets under penalty of termination. Joe signs, reassured that Mord's his ride or die. The man settles at his desk, gazing at a photo of his wife, and dials Kate. She's taken aback, and the man fights back tears recounting his tumultuous day. After regaining his composure, he vows to torch this infernal place.